Hello and welcome back. This time we'll work on finishing the basename utility. If you remember from the last time, we wrote some test cases for our program and we saw how to test functions, and we looked at testing a simple function like getBasename, which returns a value, and it was pretty easy to test that. We made sure that the base name that we get from that function matched our expectations. For functions like option A and option S, we had to capture the output from those functions, and then we made sure that the output that we captured was the correct output. And that wasn't that difficult. And we also looked at the case where we expected our option S function to throw an error in the case where there was no suffix provided. We also saw how to use with to capture that exception and make sure that is always thrown when there's no suffix. And this time I'll work on adding the option Z to our utility and finish off basename. Before we do that, let's see how basename works. So if you say basename -z and you provide name, it will find the base name from that name, and it will not put a new line character at the end. To see it more clearly, I'm going to include one more utility or a name. So I have to provide a -a. Yep. With the -a switch, we provide a lot of arguments, and -z make sure that there are no nulls, there's no new line character at the end. If we invoke basename without the -z switch, you'll see that every name is printed in a new line. I'm not sure what the exact reason of having a z switch in basename is, but we'll implement that. Our implementation will differ in the sense that we'll make sure that if there is a z switch, it's the first switch in the command line arguments. So it will be like Python basename.py -z, any other switch if there's one, just to keep it simple. We will look at adding -z to our base name, but we'll make sure that we update our test cases for option A and option S, as we will refactor them to add this particular switch. So let's get started. By our assumption, if there is a -z switch, that's the first switch it'll be. So we'll check if sys.argv1 equals -z. If there is a -z switch, then let's just set to be true, and then option Z is false otherwise. So what I'm making sure is that if by default option Z is false because there's no switch provided, but if we see that switch for the index 1, then we set that option to true so that our code knows that there was such a switch provided. The other thing we'll do is refactor our program. Right now we have an option A and an option S, and they both print the base names for the given names on the command line, but this time we'll make sure that they'll only return a string in the correct order. For example, so result would be my list, and we'll see how to create a string from a list. So right now what I'll do is add a base name to the end of this list. So inside option A, I'm trying to return a string, which will in the normal case would be basically a bunch of base names connected by a /n. So I'm storing all the base names from all the names in a list, and then when I return this, I join these strings in this list with a /n between them. And to show you this, I'll show you this in the Python interpreter. So we activate our, let's say, Python, and so I activated my virtual environment. Now I'm inside the Python shell, and I'll show you what exactly that does. Let's say our list is a list with a bunch of strings. This is our list. If I say space dot join x, we see that all of the strings inside our list was joined with a space between the elements. For now, just know that if you have a string and you call a join with a list as a parameter, it basically stitches them together with that string in between every list element. In the normal case, we have a string that's appended at the end of every base name. Here it's /n. We'll do the same with our option s function. So append it to result and then return result, so that everything is joined with a /n. And now, rather than just assuming that option function will print it, we'll save that result, and so in case we saw an option, we'll print that particular result. One thing to note is that Python is different from, if you're coming from a C or C++ background, you may find this a little bit tricky or even incorrect, that there is a variable name result that's inside this for and then inside this if, and then we're basically able to print this here. In C, if you have something inside this if and you have a variable inside that, it'll just vanish once you're done with that if. But in Python, if you take that branch, they'll persist. You can also see that here. For example, let's say if true, a equals 1. See, so in the interpreter we said if true, a equals 1, and then we tried printing a, and it gave us a value 1 because this condition was true, and so a was set to 1, and so we were able to access a. And that's why I basically just print the result, because I know that if we are in the case where the option found was true, then I have a variable called result that's set, and I can print that. Also, let's make one more change. In case options Z was provided, we know that everything after that could have other options. For example, it could have an option A or option S. So I'm gonna modify my sys.argv to be sys.argv and everything from 2 and above, because our code for option A and option S assumes that the option is at the very beginning. Again, let's look at this with an example. If I have something like this, and then let's say compare, and if I do a slice, so slice after the index of this -z, I'll have the list in the format that my option A and option S assumes. Here I did a slice from starting from 2 because the 0th index is the name of the file itself, so basename.py. And if I find that -z option, I'm going to set the correct input arguments to the script correctly, so that if there is an option provided for option A or option S, then argument array is correct. And if there was no option found, we'll do the correct thing anyway. And so that's like our first change. Let's try this out, make sure that works. And now you remember we can simply run our tests and we get a failure. If you see, what failed here was our program did not return anything. Our test suite actually cached the error in our program. So it says it found an empty, let me go to the file. It's that line, I guess, test option A. There's a failure in both of these. So it goes up here, and this one. So the first failure is here. And so it says I saw nothing on this capture.out, but I expected that to be cmp/n. This is because now our option A and option S return string. So now we have to make sure that they return the correct string. Okay, so we'll change our test so that the test suite works as it correctly. Basically capture. So this is the result, and rather than capturing the input arguments, I'm just gonna assert that on the result, because now we are returning these as results and not printing them out. Result. I'm gonna do the same for option S. Okay, I've changed all the tests so that we can compare the result value from option S and option A rather than assuming they printed something. And let's try running our test again. And we still see a failure. And now if you look closely, this failure is because our functions are not appending a final /n at the end of the string they're outputting. And that's the way join works. It only puts this string at the in the middle of the list elements and not at the end. And so with the failure we saw, we know that there must be should be a /n at the very end. We can fix it by making sure that we do append something at the end of the string we generate. Here I'm making sure that if there is a non-empty result, because we don't really want a /n in the case there's no base name inside the result list, that I add a new line character at the very end. And I'll do the same here too. If result basically tests that this list is non-empty, and it returns false if the list is empty. So if the list is empty, we simply return an empty string. And let's try that again. And all our test cases pass. So we can be sure that these changes did not break anything that we already are testing. So that's very powerful. Now you see the utility in writing test. You make sure that your program is working as expected. And if we had a much bigger test suite, it was checking a lot of different variations on these two functions, we won't have to do that manually each time. And this saves you a lot of time, not just writing code, but also making sure that your changes are correct. We still haven't really fixed our -z option. So what we'll do this time is, now we know that option A and option S return a string. Adding support for option Z is really easy. We'll just make sure that when we join the result list in these functions, we join them with /n if there was no option Z provided, and an option with an empty string if option Z was provided. So there are a lot of ways you could do that, but the simplest is to pass in a delimiter. We'll just say delimiter equals /n. This is a way to provide arguments. So this is a default argument. A default argument can only appear at the very end or after other default arguments. What a default argument says is that if you do not provide any value for delimiter, this particular argument, it will automatically assume it's /n or this value. So we say, that's why we say delimiter equals /n. But if you do provide a value, it would be that particular value. What we'll do here is, rather than using a /n, we'll join it by delimiter. And we'll do the same here. And I'll also add that as a default argument to this function. So with this function, we'll also say delimiter is by default a /n or a new line character. And now when we call this function here, this option function, we'll set the correct delimiter. So if option Z is provided, our delimiter would be empty string option Z else /n. So this is a new syntax. If you haven't seen it, it's an expression which says that if this value equates to true, then the result of this expression is this particular value. Otherwise, the result is this. So it's a way to express simple computations where you need a value. And so what we do here is, if there's a option Z provided. We set this to be an empty string, otherwise set to a new line character, and let's see if this works. So that works, but we haven't really tested our program with the Z operator. So what we can do is let's add a few tests for our Z operator, and I'm just gonna write a couple for both of these cases. So delimiter equals. You can also provide arguments to a function by writing their actual name. So when I say delimiter equals this empty string, I'm saying set the value for that particular argument to be this empty string. That makes it a little easier to write and understand why I'm just passing a single empty string, and then I make sure that the result is correct. Now let's test that again, and that works. I'm gonna do the same for our option S, and so I'll probably just copy this thing. Oh, and well, that doesn't sound right. Yep. So I think I didn't really save the file. Now that's fixed, and I'm probably just gonna say stdio.h and stdio.c, and then make sure that we get this string because we remove this string, and make sure that our delimiter is correct. There we go. We fixed our program, and now we can be sure that, at least from the test perspective, that it works. And now I'm gonna try a couple of values here. stdio.h, stdio.c, that's correct, and I'm gonna do the same. That's fine. Some people might notice that this is not entirely correct, and I urge you to find what's exactly wrong with this output, compare that to the base name, and try fixing that. As of now, I think our base name utility is finished. We have added all the three options, -z, -a, -s. It is an exact replica of the Unix base name utility, and again, you could make a few changes and make sure that it works exactly the same as the Unix base name works. But that could be a simple mini project for you, and then you can update the test cases. And we left our program with a bug where I won't tell you what the bug is. You can compare the output of this base name with the output of the Unix base name. Just a hint that it's to do with the output. We did learn quite a bit with this, even simple utility. Learn about functions, we learn about how to import things, a while loop, how to return values from inside a function, how to provide arguments to a function, how to provide default arguments to a function. Then we looked at list indexing, string indexing, joining results for a string, joining results in a list as a string. We looked at for loops, quite a few things. We also looked at how to test your functions, make sure that they work. All in all, that was a pretty useful exercise, I think. Next time, we'll look at some other utility from the Unix command line. And I hope that you're finding this series interesting. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.